saying that what Plato's really trying to convey is that these interpretation can be false. The interpretation can be biased, they can be prejudiced, they can be influences by human error or whatever. And in order to like truly understand the essence of information, the essence of truth, we kind of need to like be able to develop thinking for ourselves, like critical thinking. Not, of course, like interpretation helps, but we shouldn't rely solely on other people's interpretation of the information presented. We need to go on a sort of like as Hoy said, enlightenment journey, to truly think for ourselves and decide and to find out like yes, this is the true essence of thing and not just like a false interpretation by and influences by other factors. Yes.
No, Min, that was so well said. Thank you so much. I think you're right on it. I think you're thinking about it just the right way. So Plato, and through Socrates, is thinking exactly as Not-Min is saying, that much of the so-called truth that we encounter, is mediated by other people's interpretations of what the truth is. And through the process of mediation, through the process of being represented, it can be warped, distorted, misconstrued. Plato wants us to get at, as Min says, the essence of truth, the essence of knowledge, right? Ultimately, what he breaks it down to, and this is just another way of saying everything that Min just said, he breaks it down into two categories, Plato does, or Socrates does. One category is the realm of the visible, the realm of the senses. He says, you can't trust this. And here again, I think you see actually a lot of parallels with Buddhist thought, right? Plato says you can't trust the world of the senses. It is the world of illusion. Everything is changing, everything is temporal, everything is in flux. So the realm of empiricism is a big word having to do with observation through the senses. What you see, what you hear, what you taste, what you smell, you can't trust these things for Plato. You can't trust your sensory experience of the physical world or of the social world. So we cannot trust the senses. What can we trust for Plato? How do we, if we can't trust anything that we're seeing and feeling, and we also have to be careful about what we're thinking, then what do we trust? How do we get out of the cave? We don't trust the visible realm, right? Not the visible realm, but the so-called intelligible realm. The intelligible realm. And I'll add a little bit about the intelligible realm onto my slide here. This is why Plato is associated with metaphysics. Actually, he's one of the major philosophical fathers of thought in metaphysics. Metaphysics, meta means beyond, right? And physics refers to the physical world, the empirical world, the world that you can see and touch and feel. Plato is interested in metaphysics because he's not interested in the world that you can see and touch and feel. He's interested in what he calls the realm of forms, the intelligible realm, a realm that you can get to through thought alone, through logic alone, through reason alone, and a realm which is eternal, unchanging, a realm from which everything else comes, right? All things come from the realm of forms for Plato. All things come from one distinct origin. And so you kind of have a kind of a blueprint for existence, thought, knowledge, and you don't need empirical experimentation to do it. You can do it with reason. You can do it with reason alone. So Plato is not a natural scientist. He's a metaphysical philosopher. He's not a physician. Does that make sense? So what does his metaphysics look like? What is true knowledge for Plato? I've been saying truth, and he uses a couple of different words to describe it. Goodness is one of the main ones that he arrives at, right? He says, and I'll read from this quote, the last thing to be seen, now this is when the prisoner gets out of the cave, the last thing to be seen, and it isn't easy to see either, in the realm of knowledge is goodness. So this is the ultimate thing for Plato. This is the ultimate form. On the syllabus, I wrote truth with a capital T, and we can think about goodness with a capital G. It's like the ultimate, eternal, unchanging blueprint of goodness from which all temporal goodness emanates or draws its essence. He says, in the realm of knowledge, the last thing is goodness, and I'll continue reading. And the sight of the character of goodness leads one to deduce that it is responsible for everything that is right and fine, whatever the circumstances, and that in the visible realm, it is the progenitor of light and the source of light. And in the intelligible realm, the realm of thought, it is the source and provider of truth and knowledge. And I also think that the sight of it is a prerequisite for intelligent conduct, either of one's own private affairs or of public business. So what do you notice with that last sentence? What is Plato connecting intellectual thought to? What do you think, Nam? I see Nam has a hand raised. Yeah, Plato sometimes puts it in religious or theological terms, and sometimes, often he doesn't really. But I think that you're right, ultimately, to suggest that Plato is saying that we have this innate capacity to learn. We are all born with this innate capacity to learn and to hone our minds as instruments of thinking, of critical reasoning. And we can arrive at an understanding. Ultimately, what Plato's thinking about is a kind of movement from low-level thought, which you can think of it as like a pyramid, where on the bottom, you have just basic perception. And that's what the prisoners are seeing in the cave. And then they move up to belief. So you have kind of down here at the bottom, you have like belief and perception, just what you see in the physical world. And as you move up in your progress as a learner, as you move up in your progress, you move to understanding, to something like enlightenment, as was said earlier, right? So it's this movement from basic perception and belief to understanding and enlightenment. And when you reach that greater area of enlightenment, of understanding, of wisdom, we might say, you also learn ethics. You learn morality. You learn what it means to be a good person. So in that last sentence, Plato is saying that when you arrive at knowledge of goodness, knowledge of the kind of ultimate essential things from which everything else comes, it's a very metaphysical, very kind of mystical way of thinking. He doesn't quite have a word for it, right? But he calls it goodness, this thing from which everything else that is good originates. Once you acquire enlightenment or wisdom of that, knowledge of that, experience of that, then you simultaneously acquire an ethical grounding, an understanding of how to conduct yourself well with other people. I see there's a hand raised. Is it Koi who has a hand raised? Please go ahead.
Yes, sorry, I just renamed myself just so you can see my full name.
Thank you.
My question is that yeah, you asked us earlier, but I see that this is very, very vague and I need an answer for it. So how can one exit the cave?
Yeah, we're gonna get there. Yeah. Thanks, Koi. Let's build to it, okay? Good question, and please just hold on to it, okay? So again, this is one sun that he sees. We're thinking about what the sun represents in the allegory, right? The sun represents enlightenment. It represents experience of the one truth with a capital T, the one goodness with a capital G in the world, the absolute, the absolute. So he's rejecting relativism. He's rejecting a world in which we say there are plural truths or plural ways of understanding the world. He's saying, no. There is just one way to understand the world if you're doing it right. If you're thinking the right way, if we all think the right way, we can understand, we will arrive at the same conclusion. That's kind of troubling to me personally. This idea that if we just think, and if we all think in the right way, we will arrive at one ultimate truth, one absolute good, is kind of troubling to me. And I think that as we go through the weeks in this course, we'll start to challenge notions of one absolute truth, and we'll start to see how that is politically troubling. However, for Plato, for our understanding of Plato, it's important to note that he has this universal ideal in mind from which everything else emanates. And as we pointed out, even though it's kind of troubling to me, it's also very inspiring. I really find his idea inspiring in that, as I wrote in the middle of my slide here, everyone has a mind and everyone has the capacity to do this, Plato says. Everyone has a capacity to reach enlightenment or wisdom. So what he's thinking is that the mind is not an empty vessel to fill, and this is important. This is important for our understanding of how to approach education in a liberal arts, humanities class and university. The mind is not an empty vessel. The mind is an instrument that you need to train to use. People ask me why I don't record my classes. I don't record my classes for a couple of reasons. One reason I don't record classes is because I think that people should be able to speak freely in class, and they should be able to speak freely without fear of being recorded. Now, we all know that someone else might be recording this class. Any one of the 60 some people who are in here might be recording the class, and that's just life today in 2021. You could be being recorded at any moment, any time, right? Walk down the street, there's probably 5 cameras watching you, and your cell phone is listening to you so that it can sell you advertisements, right? But despite that, I don't want to be the one creating a system of surveillance. I want people to feel that they can speak freely here. That's one reason why I don't record my lectures in Zoom. But the other reason is more connected to what Plato is saying here. The mind is not an empty vessel to fill. It is an instrument that you need to train to use. We are approaching education in this class not as the acquisition of data, not as a set of check marks. Okay, I understand these 10 things about Plato from Kevin's lecture, and therefore I understand Plato. That's not how we're approaching this class. That's not how we approach education. That's not how we really learn. The mind is not an empty vessel to fill. You don't just take data and shove it in there. The mind is a tool, an instrument that you need to sharpen and you need to be trained how to use, and that's what we're practicing. Because we don't record these lectures, you have to be present. You have to be here, in the conversation, in the moment, doing the training, sharpening your critical thinking, going through the process of sharpening your critical thinking. So there is a pedagogical reason underneath what I'm doing, and it's connected to Plato. Now, Plato's path to knowledge. The movement from inaccurate knowledge of insubstantial representations to accurate knowledge of substantial reality. That's what Plato is representing in this allegory. So how do we get this knowledge? Is it a pleasant experience? Let me just start there. What do you think, Nam? That's great, Nam. Thank you. I want to take 2 more hands. I see Joe and then Nguyen Tao. Mincho, are you there? Can you connect? Let's see, maybe while we're waiting for Mincho to try to connect, maybe we can move to Nguyen Tao, the next one that I see on my screen.
Yeah, thank you. I think that Nam was really right. In order to achieve knowledge, we gotta get out of the cave, and I think it is really important that we don't run away from that knowledge, because the fear may be huge to us, and we'll be overwhelmed by the new light, by the greater, not the absolute, but greater good, and it is really hard to to face with the new things, and not just getting used to it, we have to contemplate on it in order to achieve that knowledge, and it will not be pleasant at any point until we truly achieve it. And I think that that's all I only have that to talk about.
Yeah, I think you're right, Tao. Fu, do you want to add something? Min Fu?
I have seen something interesting in the journey of that man in the allegory. I think that the Plato has been said before that we have 4 stages of knowledge. The first one is conjecture, which is guessing. So the man, his first action is looking into the fire, and he thinks that the shadows on the wall is the casted from the fire. So he thinks that there must be something out there, which more more detailed, more. So he has the motivation to go into the outside world, and then he saw the reflection of the things in the water, and so he get the next stage, which is confidence, and he looked into the night sky and he saw a heavenly object. So I think this is a transition between confidence and the next step, which is see the truth of something, but just in specific circumstance, which is in the night. And the last step, the third step is thought. So he has the bravery to look into the sun, and but the last step is the hardest step to get, because we must analyze the knowledge we already have. So he thinks about the sun and all the effects that it gives to the earth, that about the cycle of the seasons. So I think he has turned his knowledge into something useful and more practical, and I think after all he get the highest stage of knowledge, which is knowledge. And is it a pleasant experience? I think it's not, because we must throw away our old perceptions, and must expose ourselves into the new world of knowledge, which is the sun and the outside world. So that's my opinion. Thank you.
Great point. Thank you. Very, very well said. And I like that you're thinking about how knowledge gets put to use eventually, and we're building to think of that. But as you're all noting, it is not a pleasant experience, right? You can all sympathize, I'm sure. You've all had to come on this beautiful sunny morning into a global humanities class, and you've had to suffer through it. You're still suffering through it as we speak. The acquisition of knowledge and wisdom, we all know, is a hard path. It takes discipline, it takes work, it takes perseverance, it takes determination, right? It also takes something else. And we're gonna think about the other things that it takes. First of all, what you need to get knowledge for Plato is deduction. This is an important thing to think about for Plato. Remember, Plato does not trust the world of physical forms. Plato does not trust the world of sensory experience. He says that the prisoner must start to think about the sun and then deduce that it is the source of the seasons and the yearly cycle, and that the whole of the visible realm is its domain, and that in a sense, everything which he and his peers used to see is its responsibility. Now, deduction has to do with drawing from big universal laws and principles, using only your logic. So it's separate from induction. Induction is what a natural scientist does. A natural scientist does induction. They look at a specific instance of a thing, they do a specific experiment in the natural world, and then they replicate that experiment to see if it works and if they can build a wide-reaching law or principle out of that. Deduction works differently. It works according to logic, and it works according to big ideas that then apply to all the small ideas. So it works in the opposite direction. One way that Plato does deduction is through syllogisms, logical syllogisms. Here is the most famous example of one. Every time you hear of a syllogism, you'll probably see this one. All men are mortal, Socrates is a man. Now, these are two premises. These are two premises in a logical syllogism. We can take them as true, right? All men are mortal, Socrates is a man. I don't need to go and test every human being on the planet, who ever was or ever will be, in order to believe that all men or all people are mortal, all people will die, right? By the same token, I can presume that Socrates is a human being. And therefore, I draw my conclusion. Socrates is mortal, Socrates will die just like every other person, right? So this is a logical syllogism. You need only your mind to do it. And that's what Plato's point is. You need only logic. You need only logic to arrive at knowledge of the truth if you practice your knowledge, your logic rigorously and carefully. But oh, well, let me point this out. This is a famous painting by Raphael, the Italian Renaissance painter. And it's called The School of Athens. And in the very center of this painting, you see Plato and Aristotle. And you'll see that Plato on the left is pointing up and Aristotle on the right is pointing down. And essentially what Raphael is trying to highlight is a distinct difference between these thinkers. He's trying to highlight the fact that Plato is focused on logic, on deduction, on the world of the forms. Whereas Aristotle is more like an early prototype of a modern scientist who is focused more on the natural world. He's focused more on empiricism, more on observation and experimentation. And that's why Raphael is depicting them in this way. So for Plato, you just use your logic. You need only your brain in order to think and practice thinking and arrive at truth or knowledge of truth. But it's actually a little more complicated than that. You do need a couple of other things to go your way before you can think the right way for yourself. So you do need deduction. You do need logical deduction. That's one way to arrive at knowledge of truth. But we can ask how the prisoner embarks on his journey of knowledge to truth. How does it work? What does it look like? Let's just read this passage. Socrates says, "What do you think would happen if they, that is the prisoners in the cave, were set free from their bonds and cured of their inanity?" Inanity means simply their lack of sense, their lack of reason. What would it be like if they found that happening to them? Imagine that one of them has been set free and is suddenly made to stand up, to turn his head and walk, and to look toward the firelight. What do you notice is happening in the way that this learner is being set on the path of knowledge, being set on the path of deduction, of logic? Is he doing it himself? He's not, right? And that's important for Plato. That's important for Plato. It's not something that you do by yourself. You need other people to help you. You need others to help you on the path toward the acquisition of wisdom. So philosophy, literally broken down, means the love of wisdom. But it's not just about thinking. It's not just about logical deduction. That's an important part. But it's also a self-checking method for arriving at truth. A self-checking method for arriving at truth. A method of generating new knowledge by determining if we have gone wrong. And how does it work? What is the method? The method is dialectic. The method is dialogue. You'll notice in this class and in other classes that we place a very big emphasis on speaking, on asking questions, on working through problems by trying to talk about them with your peers and with your teachers. This is a cornerstone of liberal arts education, and it goes back to Plato. The idea is that nobody alone can possess full access to universal truth all the time. So we see that Plato believes that we can all arrive at an absolute knowledge of absolute truth. At the same time, he does value a kind of relativistic approach in that we need to check each other. We need to talk to each other. We need to ask each other why we believe what we believe. You think this is good? Why do you think this is good? What does goodness mean to you? How do you define goodness? We ask these questions in order to sharpen each other, in order to train ourselves and one another in our critical thinking skills, and in order to get closer to the truth, closer to wisdom, closer to something like enlightenment. So you use deduction, you use logic, but you also engage in dialectic, in dialogue. And you'll notice that that's even happening on the formal level in Plato's writing. What does this essay, this allegory of the cave look like? It's Socrates and Plato's brother Glaucon having a conversation. What do you think right education should look like? Let me give you an allegory. How do you think this allegory helps us understand education? They're having a conversation much like the types of conversations we try to have in classrooms in liberal arts schools. Now, another important factor here is humility. This is going to be a huge component of our class, of our understanding of the humanities, and of your education in a liberal arts university, and indeed of your development as a human being, I would say. If there's one lesson you take from this class, I hope it is the lesson of intellectual humility, to be humble, to be open-minded. There's a really fun story about this with Socrates. Socrates famously said, "I am the smartest man in Athens." Now that does not sound very humble, does it? It does not sound like he is really a man of humility. But he goes on to say, "I am the smartest man in Athens because I am the only man who knows that he knows nothing." Everyone else walks around thinking they have the answers. Everyone else walks around thinking they know what is what. I alone know one truth, only one, but it's more than everyone else. Everyone else believes in a lot of false opinions about their own intelligence. What I know, the one thing I know, which makes me the smartest man in Athens, is that I don't know anything. This is called Socratic ignorance or Socratic wisdom. Acknowledging one's own ignorance is a form of wisdom. Acknowledging one's own ignorance is a form of open-mindedness. If you begin from a place in which you say, I don't have all the answers, I don't know if I'm always right, in fact, I think I'm seldom right, then you're open-minded and you're open to exploring, you're open to growing. This is an important part of Socratic dialectic. When you engage in conversation, you do it in good faith, trying to figure out answers, trying to help your interlocutor, the person you're talking to, trying to help them grow, trying to help yourself grow and understand. And if you approach it in an open-minded, good faith way, then you're on the right path, Plato and Socrates suggest. Does that make sense? Okay, one last point, and then we're gonna move into writing for the last half hour or so of class. How do we use this knowledge? Knowledge of the capital G good, this kind of mystical, enlightened knowledge, this extreme wisdom. If we get it, how do we use it? What do you think? What does Plato say? What do you need to do once you acquire knowledge or wisdom or understanding? Min An, please go ahead.
First, we have to know that knowledge is not for our isolation. It's not a property of anyone. It is a common property of the humankind, and you have to use the knowledge flexibly, and the knowledge have to be used suitable for each material condition or for each environment, and that's my opinion. Thank you.
That's great. That's great, Min. And I like it that you say that knowledge is not a property of any one individual. It's immediately implicitly turned back towards the population, right? That's good. I like that. That's a really good way of putting it. Min Fu, do you want to add something?
I want to add some things to Minan ideas because I think that the one who have knowledge must have the eyes which flexible to which between darkness and light. So we must analyze the circumstance and the experience of other ones to have a specific circumstance, a suitable one to convey our ideas properly. And the next thing is that the intelligent, you shouldn't be blinded by the glory or the benefit from legislation, so that you would be the best way to convey our knowledge. That's my idea.
Great. Good point. We have time for two more. I see Hong Ha and Not Min. Hong Ha, would you like to add something?
Yeah, in my perspective, that once we acquire new knowledge, I mean that's the truth knowledge, and we have we have to transmit the knowledge to others who don't really acquire this knowledge and have the firm beliefs in the. We know people that know this wrong, and knowledge is brings us worth to transmit to others to get people enhance the knowledge as well.
Yeah, great. We have to help others, right? It's not like we transmit the knowledge. I know what you're saying, though, and I agree with you. But what we need to do is guide them, right? You need to guide others, and you need to be humble yourself and accept guidance from others as well in order to be a good, wise student. Not Min, please go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I think I have two things I want to add, which I think Plato points out. I think it's really interesting. The first thing is he said that people who have, see the sun need to go back to like the communities and see what they see, to see the darkness that they live in. And I think it's a perfect parallel. So like you need to understand, you need to engage with viewpoints or ideas that disagree with you, even though like you may consider them like lowly or like stupid or dumb. But in order to like change people's minds, you need to be empathetic with their viewpoints. You need to like understand where their ideas, their opinions come from. And when you have a better understanding of it, it's much easier for you to debunk them or to guide, those misunderstandings to something that's correct. And I think another thing which is interesting is an admission of privilege. Plato points out that the philosophers, they were like that are raised by, that are taught by the states, like then they are taught better, they receive better education. I think that's like a pretty good parallel to like how not everybody is privileged enough to receive a good education. Not everybody is privileged enough to like have like internet connection. And also like we didn't do this all by ourselves. We receive help from other people. It's lucky that we have somebody to help us. So I think because of those privileges, we need to realize that we have those privileges. And I think that's sort of like create like a civic responsibility for us to disseminate what we have learned to other people.
Great, really, really well said. Thank you. One more, Xiao, I see you have a hand raised.
Yes, I and my team has discussed, and I feel like the way of using this knowledge is so controversial that if we go out the cave, we see something like the light, and we return to the cave and help the others. Maybe sometimes it will get to the gaslight or manipulate. We feel not sure about that we cannot move our head, and we believe others saying. But when in some situation we do need the administration, the government that guide us. But in some cases, I see that if the happening between each other, maybe it will cause some like problems, some negative effects that we cannot imagine. So the way of using knowledge is like, I think it's not true for everyone. Like in each situation, we use others like different methods of understanding.
Great, really well said. You're all emphasizing flexibility. You're all emphasizing open-mindedness. You're pointing out a civic obligation. You're pointing out a system of privilege in which indeed in Plato's Republic, one is chosen to become a philosopher because one shows a specific kind of aptitude for it. And so one is brought up to be, or really because one enjoys it also, and one is good at it. And so one is brought up to be a philosopher, and one is educated by the state and given that privilege by the state in Plato's Republic. And therefore one has an obligation to give back. And that's the main idea. So I'll add some text onto my slide here. The main idea is that you need to use this knowledge to educate others, to free them from the cave. You need to help them turn away from pleasures and indulgences, which turn the sight of the mind downward. So help them focus on the right thing, Plato says, and become a leader. Engineer a just society, a just society. If you have been trained in philosophy, your experience of genuine right, morality, and goodness will enable you to identify every one of the images and recognize what it is an image of. And then the administration of our community will be in the hands of people who are awake, who are conscious, who are aware of the problems of others, who are empathetic. Because for Plato, enlightenment and knowledge of universal truth or goodness is also knowledge of ethics. You understand how to behave ethically in the world if you access this extreme understanding that Plato wants you to move toward. So we famously have this phrase that we're going to hear a lot in this class. Philosopher king. Philosopher king. Plato wants his leader of the Republic to be a king. The leader, again, it's not a democracy in Plato's Republic. He thinks that the leader should be a king, but not just any king, a philosopher king. We should train future leaders to be philosophers. And Plato points out, or Socrates points out, that they won't want the job. They won't want to be king. And that's a good thing, because having acquired full understanding, they will not want fame or material wealth. They will understand that fame and material wealth are of the visible realm, the material realm, the transient realm. These are things that don't matter so much, these material things. They don't care about that. What they want will be justice, because they have an understanding of ethics and they have empathy for others. And they will lead as a duty and as an obligation because society educated them, and therefore they owe society. They owe something back to society in return. Now, as a final note, I'd like to point out that Plato was well aware that this is a dangerous job. Do the people in the cave want to be enlightened? Do the people in the cave want to be educated? Not really. A lot of them, Plato suggests, will resist the good leadership of a philosopher king. And Plato is specifically thinking about Socrates, who was put to death just 24 years or so before Plato was writing the Republic. So Plato's own teacher, Socrates, who is the speaker here, was put to death because he was doing the type of thing that Plato is talking about doing. He was going around trying to educate people to focus less on material things and to focus more on intellectual enlightenment. He was charged with corrupting the youth. That's what they always use to kill teachers, right? Charges of corrupting the youth. So Plato recognizes that this is dangerous work, and he recognizes that often when the philosopher king, or the enlightened one, or the one with understanding, goes back into the cave, he's going to meet with a great deal of resistance from people who don't want to change their conventional behaviors. Make sense? Now, an irony about the readings for this week, and just quickly, I'll introduce next week's reading and then we'll move into writing. One irony is that Plato did not like poetry. He did not like drama. He did not like tragedy. He did not like comedy. He thinks that theater is a bad thing. Why do you think that?
Maybe it's too dramatic.
Yeah.
Maybe because it's fabricated.
It's provocative. Plato doesn't mind being provocative.
No, be fabricated.
Can you say again?
Fabricated.
Replicated.
No. Let me just type. I think it's because my mic.
Thanks, Anne. I actually see like ways in what you're saying makes sense. Replicated, provocative. Let me see. Fabricated. Yes, that's right. Fabricated. Thanks, Naaman. Thanks for playing along and putting it in the chat box. Fabricated. That's right. It's fabricated. It's false, right? It's false. It's a representation of the real. It is not the real. Moreover, theater, drama, Plato says, stirs the emotions. You get emotional. Those of you who have read Oedipus know that it's trying to make you emotional, right? It's a tragedy. Plato doesn't like that. He doesn't want you to be ruled by your emotions. He wants you to focus instead on a kind of detached, unemotional logic, a detached, unemotional reasoning. He wants you to be ruled by the mind, not by the emotions. I disagree. I think that we should allow ourselves to investigate our emotions. And I think, of course, as a professor of literature, big surprise that theater is a wonderful place to examine ideas. Next time, we're going to read Sophocles' Oedipus, which is produced during the lifetime of Socrates, the lifetime of Socrates. Sophocles is a contemporary of Socrates. And it's a tragedy about a king who is determined to figure out the cause of a plague in the fictional city of Thebes. And the question is he a good philosopher king? This is going to be the main question we're going to ask next time. We're going to keep Plato alive. We're going to keep Plato in the conversation. We're going to try to understand Oedipus through Plato's understanding of education and leadership and civic duty. Is Oedipus a good philosopher king by Plato's standards? Does he pursue knowledge the right way, in your own opinion, according to Plato? Does he use knowledge the right way, according to Plato, or according to your own opinion? And finally, what would you say is Oedipus's major flaw as a thinker or leader? These are going to be the guiding questions we're going to use to get into this play and indeed at the same time continue to examine some of the big problems around the pursuit of knowledge, epistemology, around civic engagement, around education, and around the right way to lead. Some of the major themes of this course, which will travel from Plato to Oedipus and onward to our future texts. Okay, makes sense? You see where we're going? Okay, let me get out of this screen. I'm going to stop sharing just for 1 minute so that I can get out of my PowerPoint. And now I'm going to open another PowerPoint. I know we're moving relatively quickly here. And if you do have questions about Plato or if there's things we missed, we can always discuss more in office hours, or we can indeed still bring up Plato in our future discussions. Indeed, we will. Again, all the reading in this class is cumulative. We'll be talking about Plato when we talk about Sophocles and so forth. Okay, so we've got about 20 minutes left here, and I want to get into some more writing instruction, all right? We're going to have the first major writing assignment coming due in a few weeks. I will get that to you, I think, before Thursday, and we can talk about it on Thursday. It's going to be your outline assignment. But for now, I just want to continue talking about the way to structure a paper, the way to structure an introduction in particular. You'll recall that last time we talked about the K-pop group Blackpink. we can continue talking about Blackpink. We talked about these major tests for a thesis. You want it to be an explanation, not a fact. You want it to be debatable. You want it to be significant. You want it to be precise and specific, right? So I'm just going to be roaming around these same slides that I've already posted in our Canvas and that I would encourage you to look at if you have not looked at them already. I'm going to give you the basic breakdown or structure of an introduction in a couple of different ways. Here's one way. You can begin an introduction with a thesis, and then you can do your thesis in 2 sentences, 1 or 2 sentences, and then you can move into a question around move into your subpoints. Let's say this is the word I will use, subpoints or subclaims. And these are reasons why the reader should agree with your thesis. And again, you can think about paper structure. You can think about the architecture of a paper. Each one of these subpoints will be a major point that you will argue in a topic sentence. A topic sentence is the first word or the first sentence at the head of an introductory paragraph. So you don't say the same thing twice. You say it in different words, but you introduce your subclaims, the reasons why the reader should agree with your thesis. You introduce them in your introduction, and then you treat each one in its own specific body paragraph. After introducing those subclaims, you can move into a deeper development of the thesis. This is the so what question. This is the significance. Why does my thesis matter? Why should you agree with it? Here's another way to do it. You get right into your thesis, you explain your thesis, and then right hinged with the thesis, attached to it, connected to it, you explain why your thesis matters. Why should anyone give a shit? Why should anyone read this paper? Who cares, right? Why is my paper important? Why is my argument important? And then you move into what I have here on the slide as 1B, your introduction of your subclaims, which will then map onto your body paragraphs. So I give some more about body paragraph outlines, and we can talk about that maybe in the next class. But here's the general paper outline. You introduce your thesis, you introduce your subpoints, let's call them A, B, C. These are the reasons why you should agree with your thesis. You make sure to say why your thesis matters, why it's significant. And then you move into your body paragraphs. And each body paragraph relates directly back to one of your subpoints, which again should be a specific arguable claim, just like your thesis, but now in support of your thesis, a reason why the reader should agree with my thesis. So this is why I say that the introduction is really a roadmap. It's a roadmap. If you do this, if you just look at the structure, you'll see that anyone who reads the introduction knows exactly what you're going to do in the paper. They know exactly what you're going to argue. Now, it's up to you to argue it. It's up to you to convince your reader to agree with you. And that's what the body paragraphs do. Make sense so far? Excuse me. Let me give you my Blackpink example. So we're getting back into just looking at introductory paragraphs, okay? Introductory paragraphs. You remember we talked about things to avoid: broad statements, outrageous claims, obvious facts. Avoid these things. Get right into your specific topic. Make your topic narrow, make it arguable, make sure that it makes a claim as to its own significance, why it matters. And then you're going to need to introduce subpoints or claims. We talked about this and how the subpoint should actually follow the same tests as the thesis. It should be specific, arguable, significant, and it should clearly relate back to and support the thesis. So I have some subpoints here and I'll read them in a minute, but here's some subpoints in support of my thesis. And let's just think, okay, I have a thesis and I have subpoints. How do I organize them in a body paragraph? Well, most of you probably learned to do it this way in high school. This is the common way that most students are trained to do this in high school. Your introductory paragraph, most high school teachers will tell you, should introduce the topic broadly, and then introduce the main areas of analysis, and then move towards your thesis claim. and have your thesis claim as the last 1 to 2 sentences in your introductory paragraph. That's fine. You can do that. You can do that model. That's okay. Here's what it would look like if we were using my Blackpink example. I'm just going to actually lead. I'm actually just trying to cut out a lot of the fluff, trying to cut out a lot of the extra stuff. And I'm just going to lead with my subpoints and then move into my thesis in this paragraph. So in interviews, the members of the K-pop group called Blackpink emphasize their lack of involvement in the more creative elements of their enterprise, including songwriting and production, choreography, and fashion. That's a subpoint. But it's also introducing my main area of analysis, right? They use the language of automation and efficiency to discuss their roles as performative artists. By contrast, they use the language of art and creativity to discuss their business partnerships. Each one of these 3 sentences is a subclaim, and this will be more clear in my next slide. Now I'm going to move into my thesis. The members of Blackpink do not rhetorically package themselves as inventive or self-directing artists. Rather, they present themselves as well-trained and hardworking performers of others' music and choreography, and as creative business strategists. Now I'm going to so that's like the first part of my thesis, but I feel like I need to say something more. I need to say something about why this matters. What's the significance of this? And now I'm going to get into the real meat of my thesis, the significance. I say that such a marketing strategy has met with a positive reception in Western culture suggests that our notions of individualism and creativity have changed. Rather than conceiving of the performer as a creative artist, we conceive of them as an employee of the culture industry. What I've done here is I've introduced in the first 3 sentences my subpoints. I'm going now in the paper proper, I will address each one of these sentences in its own body paragraph. And I will argue for each one of these sentences one by one in its own body paragraph. Then I move into a thesis. And with that thesis, I say something about the significance of that thesis. So I'm building from subpoints up to my thesis. This is the kind of high school model that perhaps you're familiar with. Maybe you're not, but this is a common high school model for doing the introductory paragraph. It's fine. You can do it this way. I want to offer you another way to do it as well. Here's another way you can do it. Come right out with your thesis. You'll notice here that what I do is I offer just one quick sentence, and I'm not being too broad in this quick sentence. I'm introducing my topic in a relatively narrow fashion. In recent years, the K-pop group Blackpink has had numerous international hit singles and garnered a strong popular following. Okay, now I get right into my thesis. However, the members of Blackpink do not rhetorically package themselves as inventive or self-directing artists. Rather, they present themselves as well-trained and hardworking performers of others' music and choreography. What's the value of getting right into your thesis? The value is that you're telling your reader exactly what the argument will be. You're being specific. You're telling them exactly what you're going to get into, exactly what you're going to argue. Now, if you wanted to, you could include the significance right up here with your claim. I could take these last sentences here, and I could add them to the bottom or the end of my claim here, and that could keep it all in one place. That's one way to structure it. Another way to structure it is to kind of introduce your thesis, and then your subpoints, and then move to the significance of your thesis. But recognize that the significance is an integral part of your thesis. Even though you're separating them and structuring it a little differently for a kind of a punchy impact at the end of your introductory paragraph, you're still thinking about the claim and the significance as really one. Okay, so let's read how this looks. I move into my subpoint. And again, each subpoint, I'm going to address each one in its own body paragraph in the paper proper. You'll notice that each subpoint is arguable, debatable, specific, significant, and is a reason why you should agree with my thesis. It's the way to think of your subpoints. In interviews, the members of the group emphasize their lack of involvement in the more creative elements of their enterprise, including songwriting and production, choreography, and fashion. So they say, I don't dress myself, other people dress me. I don't do the dancing, I don't create the choreography, other people do it and I learn how to dance it. I don't write the songs, other people write the songs. Subpoint 2, they use the language of automation and efficiency to discuss their roles as performing artists. In other words, they talk about how they're not really creatively contributing to it. They're just really, really good at doing what other people tell them to do. They're really good at pitching their voice a certain way. They're very good singers. They're really good dancers, but they're not creatively doing it. They're just kind of automatically doing what they've been trained to do in their dance routines. Subpoint 3, by contrast, they use the language of art and creativity to discuss their business partnerships. For example, when you get them talking in interviews about their relationship to Adidas, then they use words like collaboration and creativity. It's quite interesting to me. So now I'm going to get into the significance. This is what I did. I watched a bunch of interviews with Blackpink, and I started thinking about this. And I thought, what's the significance of this? It's actually pretty interesting. What does it mean? And I thought, okay, what about this? Now I'm reading my significance. That such a marketing strategy has met with a positive reception in Western culture suggests that our notions of individualism and creativity had changed. In other words, people don't care. People used to care. Did this musician write their own music? That was a question that you asked when I was 20. But people don't ask it quite as much anymore, it seems to me. Rather than conceiving of the performer as a creative artist, we conceive of them as an employee of the culture industry. Now, I thought that I should say a little something more there to explain it a little more, so I added a couple more sentences. The popular artist no longer embodies independent and radical thought or inventiveness. Instead, the artist's artistry is measured in terms of her ability to adapt to and exploit market pressures and opportunities on behalf of a larger corporate entity. This is again thinking about business. I use my artistry, I use my creativity in my business engagements. So you'll see that, again, you can think about paper writing as architecture. Think about it as structure. This is a blueprint for an introductory paragraph. If I pull out every bold underlined piece here, every bold underlined heading, I have my paragraph. It's done. There it is. I can turn that in as my paragraph. And it provides a map for the reader. You can see exactly what my subpoints will be. Each one of those subpoints will be argued thoroughly with evidence and analysis in its own body paragraph. And I've told you why my argument matters. It matters because it's telling us something about a really important thing, the way that popular culture conceives of the artist. That's changing. That's important. So we have about 9 more minutes here. I can pause for questions, concerns, thoughts. Again, I don't do this to be prescriptive exactly. I don't do this to say these are exactly the rules to follow, paint by number, write by number, do ABC and you'll be fine. I do think, though, that it's important to learn about these rules so that you know how to break them. I think it's important to learn how to put an introduction together and how to take it apart, how to move the pieces around, and how to recognize what each piece is doing, and how every sentence counts. Yes. Yes. Yeah, it says on the syllabus. I think that's right. Yes, thank you. So I will send out the prompts for this in the next by tomorrow night. I'll send out the prompts, and the text will be the text of the first 4 or 5 weeks of our class. And I will offer prompts which get you to think about the texts, which ask you open-ended questions about the texts. What is the right way to interpret this text? An example of such a question would be my example on my last slide today on Oedipus. Is Oedipus a good philosopher king? Something like that, open-ended. You could argue it any number of ways, right? So that's the type of thing that I will ask. And you'll have to come up with an interpretation of the text, an argument about the right way to interpret the text, which will then rely on subpoints in support of your argument. Oedipus is a good philosopher king. He thinks about helping others. He pursues truth at all costs in a determined way. He exposes himself to hardship. He does not care about himself. He cares about others. These might be my subpoints. Here's my 3 reasons why Oedipus is a good philosopher king. And now I'm going to argue each subpoint in its own body paragraph. So I'll send you the prompts by tomorrow night. And the prompts will be on the texts from the first 4 or 5 weeks of class. So you can read ahead if there's a text that interests you and you want to start working on it. And I will also send you an outline template, which will break down for you kind of the places where you need to plug something in. Write your thesis here, write it in 2 sentences. Write your subpoints here, 1 to 2 sentences per subpoint. Write your topic sentence, now we're moving to the body paragraphs. Write your topic sentence here. Now include your textual evidence in support of your topic sentence. Now explain how that textual evidence supports your topic sentence. So I explained this a little bit more in these. If you go into this PowerPoint again, the writing PowerPoint that I have in week 1 in our Canvas, at the end of it, I have these additional slides and tips, and slowly we will go over all of these throughout the next couple of weeks. But what I will want you to do is the outline will look something like this. You'll do an outline of your introduction, just as I've shown you an introduction can be broken down just now. And then when you move into your body paragraphs, you'll do a similar kind of outline of your body paragraphs, in which you'll say what you'll be arguing. That will be the first sentence of your body paragraph. And then you'll say in the next sentence, how do you know? You'll provide a quote from the text. And then in the next part, you'll analyze that quote. You'll explain how that quote proves that your topic sentence is accurate. And if it's not evident, how that topic sentence in turn proves how your overall thesis claim is correct. So this is going to be training you to think about the structure of paragraphs at each level of the paper, and actually training you also how to outline. Outlining is essential, and I'll talk more about the importance of outlining, but suffice it to say that this is still the method that I use in my own writing. I have never published a piece of professional writing without following this kind of outlining procedure. It gets more complicated as you get bigger, as you move away from like a kind of introductory 5-paragraph academic paper. But I still use these basic approaches to writing, which I was using as a freshman in university. Does that help you see where we're going and what to expect? Other questions? Let me see, I'll just quickly answer. I see Min Kwan asked in the chat box. This is the type of thing, again, I don't always see the chat box questions. So please, if I miss an important one, please let me know, okay? Min Kwan asks in the chat box, do we have to read the whole Bible? No, that would be a whole class. That would be like a 3-year-long class if we were studying the entire Bible. It's big. You just have to read the parts on the syllabus. So look on the syllabus and you'll see, maybe I'll share my screen again and show you really quickly. The syllabus is your guide. The syllabus tells you everything that you will have to do every week of this class. And you should always look at your syllabus every single week for guidance on where the class is going and what we'll be doing. So for the Bible next week, we're going to read, so for next time we'll read Oedipus, but in week 3 we'll start to read the Hebrew Bible, and then we'll read the Christian Bible. We'll read Genesis, that's just the first book of the Bible. And we'll read chapters 1 through 3, 16 through 19, 38, and 39. So I think I may have put all of Genesis in Canvas, I don't quite remember, but just read those chapters. It's not too long, it's maybe 15 pages or something like that. And then the following week, we will only read the Gospel according to Mark, which is, I don't recall, about 20 some pages maybe. So always look here, and that's going to tell you what to expect. Very seldom will we read an entire book. We're almost always going to be reading selections or excerpts from a book.
Professor, do we have a question that is there any word limit for the writing assignment?
Yes, there will be a word limit for the writing assignment. I think it's, I don't quite remember, but I think it's about 1,400 words or maybe 1,200, somewhere in there. It amounts to about 4 or so pages of double-spaced writing, 12 fonts. But I will give you precise word count to expect when I give you the paper prompts. However, the first writing assignment will just be an outline. So you won't have that kind of word count. It's going to be about quality, not quantity. Let's see, Koi has a hand raised.
Yes, I know you have mentioned a bit about this kind of answer to my question, but I just want to raise it again, just so I can hear the full response. What can we do now in order to prepare for that assignment?
Do the reading. Keep up on the reading. See if you have questions about anything that we talked about in lecture, discuss them with me, discuss them with our teaching assistants, discuss them with your classmates. If you have questions about the writing assignments, same. Discuss them with your classmates, TAs, and with me. Not the writing assignments, but the writing instructions so far. And know that in a mere 24 to 30 hours, you will have the writing prompts and you will have the outline, and then you can start to get into the nitty-gritty. I withhold those on purpose. I want you to ease into the class and spend a couple of class times getting used to the kind of thing that we do here and the kind of work we're doing here. So I applaud your desire to get right into the assignments. I'm the same way, and I'll have the assignments to you very soon, and you'll have plenty of time to do them. Okay. I do want to end on time. I know people have things to do, so I'll end right now. I will also hang out for a little while and talk to people if people want to talk. But if you are if you're good and you don't have any questions, then feel free to leave. And I'll see you in 2 days when we do Oedipus. Okay? Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Professor.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's very unique for sure. I'll introduce it more next week at the end of class, but maybe we actually have more time to do it now. So we're going to be reading the Hebrew Bible and then the Christian Bible, and we're going to be thinking about them as 2 separate documents, even though Christianity will take the Hebrew Bible and incorporate it into Christianity. And indeed, Islam will then take much of the Christian and Hebrew Bibles and incorporate it into Islam, and we'll be reading a bit of that too, the Islamic tradition when we get into 1001 Nights. These are all texts of a religion. So the Hebrew Bible is the Bible for the Jewish religion, for the Jewish faith. Bible means simply collection of books. It's a collection of books that are trying to talk about the creation of a people in a historical period, the Jewish people, and trying to lay out their political laws, their social systems, their history as a community, and also their religious laws and their understanding of religion and faith. So it's a kind of cohesive document, which is simultaneously, actually it's not cohesive. It's a pretty scrambled document that gets put together over time by lots of different people and lots of different writers who say, all of these are kind of the canonical parts of who we are as a people, as a nation, as a religion. And these are all important. And so we're going to incorporate them into this all important text, all important scripture or collection of books, which is going to kind of tell us who we are as a community and how we relate to our religion and our culture and our politics, our ways of living. So we're going to be reading this book not so much in religious terms as in historical, political, and epistemological terms. We're going to be understanding these very important religious books, not in terms of faith, but in terms of how they are understanding epistemology. How do you make sense of the world? And how do you engage with other people in the world? These are kind of the two main cornerstones of our class. Does that make sense? That's right. And so when we read the Hebrew Bible, the Jewish Bible, we're just going to read Genesis, the very first book of the Hebrew Bible. But even Genesis is written by more than one author, you'll see. And so parts of Genesis are kind of seem cobbled together, and we'll talk about that and how, you know, the creation story is retold a couple of different times. One time it looks like this, and the second time it looks like that. And we'll talk about why they do that and about the implications of that. And we're just going to read a few different parts from Genesis. We're going to read the creation myth, and we're going to read some interactions between an early founding father of the religion, Abraham, and his relationship with God and his understanding of divinity. Again, the emphasis being on understanding, on epistemology. And then we're going to read some representations of women in Genesis. Thanks, Sam.
Hi, I have quite a philosophical question. It just popped up in my mind when I was studying. I was reading Oedipus and also the allegory of the cave. So my question is it to learn and to excel is to maintain a skeptical mind? And however, most of the beliefs we got from our perceptions and throughout our experience are quite subjective. Like anecdotes, evidence are not very reliable when it comes to maybe science or when we want to pursue the truth. So is that also makes empiricism quite a flawsome tool when we want to get closer to the truth? So.
Yeah, Aristotle would say yes, and Plato would say not so much. You know, so Aristotle, as you see in Raphael's painting, Aristotle is more associated with natural philosophy and empiricism, learning from the natural world. Plato is more interested in, he recognizes that subjectivity is a problem and that my truth might be different from yours. And that's why he has this system of dialectic that he promotes. He doesn't just promote it, he also models it. Plato's writings of Socrates are all dialogues, just like we see in the allegory of the cave. It's all Socrates talking to somebody and trying to say, here's what goodness means to me, what does it mean to you? And you say, well, goodness means that to me. And Socrates says, well, that's interesting. We seem to disagree. Let's explore this together. So through a series of kinds of questioning and conversation, we come to each other humbly with humility, recognizing that we might be wrong. Socrates says, well, this is what goodness means to me, but maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe you're right. Maybe you're wrong and I'm right. Maybe we're both wrong. Let's talk about it. And through that process, you're moving beyond subjectivity. So that's how Plato is trying to get out of the trap of subjective or relativistic thinking, where we all have our own truths, because he wants to arrive at one truth. And he believes that that's possible. There is one truth for us all, and we can arrive at it through logic and dialectic.
Right, thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you for your answer.
Yeah, thanks, Laman. I hope that helps.
Definitely it helps.
Other thoughts, questions out there?
I have a question about allegory of the cave, because according to Plato, two truths are called from, right? But how do we know, is it a perfect form or the most precious form? And is it lead to an infinite number of forms of a thing? It's also called third man agreement. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think you're kind of getting into the kind of mystical quality of Plato's understanding of truth or goodness, right? It is this essential quality that he's trying to get at. This essential quality. I mean, to go back to Nam's question, when we get into ancient Judaism and ancient Christianity, we're going to see that although Plato and the ancient Jews weren't really talking or communicating with each other, they're kind of separately arriving at a similar system for understanding. Plato is thinking about truth as one thing, which is this kind of essential, infinite thing from which all else comes. And Plato calls it goodness, but the ancient Hebrews call it God. And you'll see, I'll kind of take students through this probably in a lecture, that if we just take Plato's conception of goodness and if we just try to write down the qualities of it, and again, it's very mystical. It's hard to understand exactly what he's getting at. But the qualities of Plato's conception of the ultimate good would be, well, it's ultimate, it's absolute, it's the form from which all else takes shape, it's the origin of all other things which are good. It therefore is kind of infinite. Sounds like God, right? And of course, it's one thing. So that it's hard to go deeper than that into what exactly Plato means by his understanding of goodness, except to say that with the understanding of goodness, I mean, it's similar to trying to explain enlightenment, right? Like, really, try to articulate enlightenment. What does it really mean? Well, it's rather mystical. It's rather hard to put into words. It's kind of beyond simple reason or simple articulation, right? And I think Plato's doing something similar to that. But we can see that from this incredible enlightened understanding of the world, for Plato, one will understand the origin of all things, one will understand that that origin is good, and one will learn to see what is good in the world. And therefore, one will, with knowledge of goodness comes knowledge of ethics and proper behavior. So this is where it ties to civic engagement towards the obligation to others in the community. I don't know if that helps, Fu. Does that help?
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, can I ask next? I think my question is very, very short. I just want to explore the concept of jealousy and the action of someone who has seen the sun and now they're returning back to the cave. It's very ambiguous to me.
Yeah, are others jealous of that person?
Yeah, it's something that I think Zhao has mentioned in her response, which is kind of like the so-called inefficiency or so-called not that perfect world of education, whereby education all makes sense and it's an easy process, things to say. Yeah, so I just want to relate that back to jealousy.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So the first takeaway is that for Plato, education is not an easy process. It's dirty. It's bloody, in fact. And when the enlightened person for Plato, who's escaped the cave, who has reached enlightenment or understanding, when that person follows their civic obligation to descend back into the cave and help others learn, well, those others might be jealous of that person. That's one reaction. But for Plato, the even more common reaction is going to be irritation, disgust, expulsion. They're going to think that this person is crazy. They're going, because they think that the shadows on the wall are real. And this person is coming to them and saying, it's not real. And this person is saying, hey, stop looking at the shadows, let me free you. And they say, no, get the fuck away, I'm comfortable. I'm comfortable looking at the shadows. Stop moving me, right? And so jealousy is certainly a part of it. I don't think that's wrong. Jealousy can be a part of it. But that person who's come back into the cave, Plato notes that as they descend back into the cave, they also have trouble seeing, right? Because now their eyes are used to the light. What does he mean by this metaphor? What does he mean by this allegory? Well, someone who has reached enlightenment might have a hard time trying to communicate it to others, right? You can even think of this in terms of any expert. As someone becomes an expert in something, it becomes increasingly harder for them to talk to a new initiate to that discipline, right? This is why, I mean, that the older we professors get, the more, inept we are as teachers, sad to say. So the idea here, the main takeaway, is that when the philosopher comes back into the cave, people might be jealous, but he's going to be blinded. He's going to have a hard time trying to communicate to others what he needs to communicate to them. They're not going to understand him. They're not on his level. They're not going to know what he's talking about. He's going to be saying things that they don't want to hear. They want to believe in the shadows. They want to believe in material values. Don't tell me to quit my job and hang around thinking all day. I worked hard to get this job, right? I want to pursue material values. That's important to me. Now, for that reason, the people will attack the philosopher who comes back into the cave, who challenges their conventional ways of thinking, who challenges their conventional ways of governance, who says maybe your system of governance is wrong. Now you're going to be really making people angry, because people in power will say, what? The system of governance is wrong. What are you trying to do? Start a revolution? Somebody kill this guy. So jealousy is part of it, but so too is it tied to the philosophers challenging conventions, challenging conventional thoughts, challenging conventions of behavior, and challenging systems of governance. And all of that, as we know, is very dangerous. So people might be jealous, but they might be angered more than they'll be jealous.
So I just want to follow that up. So as I mentioned, I just want to know how, given so many strains, given so many hindrances, how can they actually get out of the cave? And how can, as Nam or someone in the class said, how can the philosophers actually turn the orientation of these people around so they can see the light? Is it mentioned or is it not?
It's implied, I think. So you're right to ask. It's implied, but not always explicit, because Plato or Socrates gets a little lost in his metaphor. But the main idea, again, is remember that to bring it back to the metaphor, you rely on others for help, and you approach that help with humility. And these are the cornerstones for Plato of learning. For Plato, I mean, Plato opened a lyceum. Plato opened a school. Plato opened the school. Plato studied under Socrates. He traveled. He returned to Athens. He opened a school. Aristotle was a student in that school. Plato would say, do what you're doing. Join a liberal arts school. That's where you're going to learn how to think for yourself. That's where you're going to learn what is a shadow and what is not a shadow. That's where, you know, I used to teach a rhetoric class here at Fulbright. And I always said the study of rhetoric is I don't really want to train people how to speak well. I want to train them how to detect bullshit. I want to train them how to see through good speech and learn to see when good speech is full of falsehoods. And that Plato says that's the type of thing that you're going to be learning. And that's what he's getting at. When he says, you know, you should be open-minded, approach education with humility, and be ready to learn from others. Be ready to test your own assumptions, your own biases, your own beliefs. Never stop doing that. The philosopher who has seen the sun, he does not stop doing that, right? Never stop doing that. It's a process, not a destination. And so you're learning these tools of self-checking. You're learning these instruments of self-examination. And that's what's important for Plato, to constantly examine yourself with the help of others. So that's the way you get out of the cave for Plato. Yeah, Tuan.
Yes, please. You said recently, you mentioned the terms of philosopher kings. You talk about that if people want to like be a philosopher king, they will find some like the kind of power or money that the kings usually did in history. But if that's the case, they don't want to find to seek for power or money. Why they just don't be just step up to be a king, but do not find about it. Just be a normal king with intention, with pioneering to step out of the cave and to bring enlightenment back to the person to the people in that cage in that cave. That's my question.
So this is tied to the question of civic duty for Plato, right? The philosopher king does not become a king for wealth or power. The philosopher king is enlightened and he knows that wealth and power are dead ends. They don't. Who cares? They're not really valuable in themselves for the philosopher king who is enlightened. But he returns to a position of leadership, of kingship, because he wants to create a system which is just for everyone else. Because he has learned through his process of understanding and enlightenment, he has learned, what has he learned? He's learned goodness with a capital G. He's learned ethics. He's learned empathy. And because of that, he feels a compulsion to create institutions which are just, which are fair, which can help all of the individuals in society. And so that's Plato's main reason why this person would become a king. But of course, they don't want to be a king, right? And that's another big point. He doesn't want leaders who want to be leaders. And this might be true. Often the best leaders are people who don't want the position. This leader for Plato is someone who comes back to do this as a way of giving back to society, because society has given this person an education, and this person values that education, and they recognize that it came at the expense of society, and now they want to use that education to give back to society by creating equitable, just systems of government.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay.
Fu still got the question, right? The new question from Fu, I guess.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Tuan.
Thank you. So I have seen that Plato teach his student not to leave people to choose their own direction and mesh the community together. So from this statement, does Plato assert even more the tendency to force others to agree with his ideals? Besides, I wonder if its consequence could turn into a totalitarian or authoritarian system of ruling. And otherwise, from a cultural point of view, would Plato ways erode the unique personality of each person or the diversity of the community? So is that make a lot of flaws in Plato ideology?
Yeah, I think so, Fu. A really good point. If you read the whole of the Republic, I don't think any of us would want to live in the Republic. it's a little too, I don't know if I'd use the word totalitarian, but I get you, and it's moving towards totalitarianism in many ways. It's a monarchical republic after all. There is a king, and you are to a great degree born into your place in Plato's Republic. And he has a whole reason for why you might enjoy being born into one station or another in life. The idea being that you will enjoy doing what you're good at, and expert judges, philosopher kings, will figure out where you have an aptitude when you are quite young, and then they will put you into that station in the world of the Republic, and you will do that job in the Republic. And so there's a kind of predetermination in which the philosopher kings have a great deal of power over the individual lives of each subject of the Republic. And that's problematic. I definitely don't want to live in Plato's Republic. It's also a bad place for women, but who have minimal access to things in Plato's Republic. At the same time, Plato's offering a republic which is quite progressive and radical for his own time, and in many ways more radical than ancient Athenian democracy, which itself was not a very good place for women or slaves, for that matter. Women could not vote or own land, and they were slaves. So even the ancient Athenian democracy wasn't a great place, and perhaps no government is. But so I think that's a fair critique of Plato's politics and his system of governance, that he, and I think that from a contemporary reading, we can find a lot of problems with his system of governance, for sure. And we're going to be reading later in this class some of the writers who I think are influencing our thought when we have problems with Plato's Republic. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, for example, and Simone de Beauvoir, and other writers who are thinking about individual identity politics. I see Lam An likes Beauvoir. That's cool. I like Beauvoir too. And so I think that we're going to part of this class will be figuring out how we have come in our own political developments as political thinkers to a place where we read about Plato's Republic and we say, there's some issues here, We're inheriting a whole history of thought that has shaped the way we think about politics, and part of this class will be to track that. But that's a long way of saying, yeah, you're right. Plato's Republic, it has a lot of problems in its politics. And at the same time, it's a hugely influential book in many ways, not just in the Allegory of the Cave, but the Allegory of the Cave is particularly influential in the way that it lays out Plato's thinking about education. And his idea that anyone can get it, anyone can develop, anyone can shape their mind into a good thinker for Plato. And that's going to be supremely important for everyone who comes after Plato and is talking about epistemology and education. Let me see, is it Yuk Zung? Am I pronouncing your name at all correctly?
Hi.
Can you say your name for me so I have a chance?
Sung.
Sung. Okay, I was kind of close.
Yeah. So in the part of the lesson that you were discussing Plato's metaphysics, you said that the mind's not a vessel to be filled, but rather a tool to train to use. So can you explain more about that and how you come to that sort of conclusion?
Yeah. It's the idea is on page 426. On page 426, I happen to have it right open in front of me, or maybe the bottom of 425. I'll just read it. Socrates is speaking, and he says, "This is what education should be: the art of orientation." So it's this famous sentence: "The education should be the art of orientation." That's a good quote to hold on to. Educators should devise the simplest and most effective methods of turning minds around, orienting them. It shouldn't be the art of implanting sight in the organ. but should proceed on the understanding that the organ, the mind, already has the capacity, but is improperly aligned and isn't facing the right way. So that's where I'm drawing this idea from, that part. So again, if I was going to provide textual evidence for this claim in a paper, those would be the sentences I would turn to in Plato's own writing. And I interpret that as meaning that, as Plato's saying, we're not trying to give, what does he say? Implant sight in an organ. That's like putting data into an empty vessel. That's like thinking I can just switch it on. I can fill a mind with information, and then that mind will understand everything because it will have all the information it needs. Kind of like thinking of a mind as a computer. And indeed, a mind is a computer, and indeed, computers are getting pretty smart. They can grow and develop, but not quite like the human mind. Not yet, anyway. So what the human mind does differently from computers, or what it does much better than most computers, is it grows, it develops, it checks itself, it tests itself. It is a tool. So you learn how to think critically as opposed to learning how to memorize data. And that's the big difference. You're not just memorizing data, you're learning methods for critical thinking, so that you can take those methods for critical thinking and you can go into a completely new situation, a completely new environment, and you can apply those critical thinking methods in a new environment, in a new situation. So that's thinking about the mind as a tool, not as just like memorizing or rote learning or collecting data and packing it into your head. And then when someone asks you for a fact, you can just spout out the fact. That's not really thinking. That's just memorizing and aping or parroting or repeating what you've been told, right? That's not real thought. So Plato's interested in real critical thinking, where you approach the mind as a tool that you sharpen. How do you sharpen it? You sharpen it by asking questions of yourself and of your peers, and being open-minded enough to listen to their responses and keep testing what you think you know. Does that make sense, Sung?
Yeah, thank you. Because like when you said the mind is not a vessel to be filled, I was kind of confused because in a way education is like the process of being educated is you're eventually you're gonna gain something. So when you said the mind is not a vessel to be filled, I kind of interpreted it as like you're not gonna get anything from education, but rather like you're it was kind of confusing, but now thanks to your clarification, I got it now.
Yeah,
thank you.
Good. Yeah. I mean, so you won't have a bunch of facts at the end of your education, or you might, you know? So
Yeah.
I was in college for like 16 years or something, right? And I do have a lot of facts crammed away in my brain, which I'm constantly forgetting, by the way. But what I really learned how to do is you can put, I'm a literary critic, and you can put a story or a piece of discourse or writing, even scientific writing, in front of me. And maybe I've never read it before, but I have the tools to take it apart. I know how to look for what it's doing. I know how to look for the ideas underneath the words. I know how to look for the biases and the assumptions underneath any sentence, even if I've never read that sentence before. So I'm not really drawing on like all the facts that I've memorized, even though I've memorized a lot. But what I'm really drawing on is a method of analysis, which I've practiced and continue to practice so often that I'm relatively good at it. And I can do it even with a piece of writing that I've never seen before in my life, or even with a piece of writing on a topic that I don't know too much about. I can see the rhetorical strategies that the piece of writing is using because I've practiced this. So that's the type of thing that he's talking about.
Right. Yeah. Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, son. Yeah, You can all stop anytime, by the way. Anytime that anyone hangs out after hours. No, this was a really good discussion, and you all asked really, really good questions. So we can always do this. Anytime you have questions, I will try to keep this space open as an office hour for us to talk about things. I mean, the funny thing is that sometimes I think these conversations are better than the class. Today, I think this conversation was better than the class. So thanks for leading it and offering so many good questions. And we can always do this. Okay, but yes, why don't we wrap it up? Let's go get lunch, right? Okay, stay well, everybody, and I'll see you in a couple days, okay? Okay.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Professor.